Lewis and Clark are in discovery thinking. We're discovering this place, and we're cataloging commerce, and we're going into land that is ours. You know, and in fact, they're entering a really old tribal world that they really have no ideological, spiritual, or physical concept of, which to my ancestors wasn't a wilderness at all. It was a beloved homeland.
We as Indian people have always been here. We as Indian people have our own way of life. We have our own language. We have our own foods. And we have our own religion.
We always say everything has a spirit. The grass, the flowers, the water, even the hills, they all have a history. If the mountains can talk, it would be amazing what they would have to say.
Allow us to give the history of our people the way we want it to be told.
Wata awa hai khubats. Wabi idutta, wabi hatska. Makura awakot. Al ibi lukhpa kawariat. La yashruk al wiki lukhpa katas. We didn't call ourselves Hidatsa back then. We called ourselves Midoka, which means ourselves. We migrated and we discovered there was another tribe of people, which was the Mandan people, the Nuada as they call themselves. Powerful people, beautiful people they were. That's how we got our names. They call us Mididari, Mididarash, those who cross the water.
Corn was brought to us by a Mandan leader, at the beginning of our time. His name is Good Fur Robe. And the Mandan taught the Hidatsa how to garden and shared with them the seeds that they had. In the springtime, there were always prayers before any gardening was done. The seeds were blessed. The Goose Women's Society were invited to come and sing and pray. In the fall, when you pick corn, one of the things my mother always said is, don't leave any behind. Ever leave a cob behind. Because in the wintertime, they get lonesome and you'll hear them cry.
Everything has a spirit, not only mankind. Our people gave token to the water each spring when Mother Nature's wake-up call came, which was the thunder, the first thunder that we heard.
We believe that the spirit world was just right here. It's still with us. And for that reason, they created these circle of skulls. Mourners would go out there to the skulls and talk to the skull like the person was still there, because that was the belief. They would bring food and drink, water or something out there to make that person feel like it's being honored or being welcomed.
We can take a buffalo and use every part of him and still use him for religious purposes at the end. The skull of that. Say that has a mind, and that mind is strong, and that's what's going to carry us each day.
You have these stories about these women carrying large loads of corn, and it looks like they're slaves, and the men walking in front. Well, those men are walking in front to protect. If they were carrying the corn and somebody ambushed them, they'd all be dead. But those men were protectors of the village and the families. And that corn belonged to the women of that household. They were going to trade. The men weren't going to trade. They were going to trade. And it was the women who owned everything. They owned the homes, they owned the gardens.
Nitani ko kinaksapu nitsikane kon. Og moksi Chito taatsi maya miamskapi pikani. Ken oka I tuoja tahkita pääsupuhtsi sessa kistonnoni tsitapino kanista iskskaatsi no kanistoni pannakaki otsapi kono tsitsitsoptoh. We moved throughout our area. I get a kick out of when they said that we were nomads. But we were in a very well-defined area, depending on the season, moving into higher ground as different roots and berries ripened and followed the buffalo as they migrated, but in a very defined traditional area. And you had the different clans moving where there was good camping grounds where you get out of the wind and cold areas. Springs were called Maxiskum and Bachtum Maxikimi, Waterton, and Nistismopistanis, the beaver bundles were given to us there.
The holy war that the Blackfeet engaged in right from the very beginning of contact with Euro-Americans was over the beaver. I'm told there's over 100 songs that accompany the beaver bundle. And they're power songs. They are representative of all of the animals on the earth, including the creepy crawly things, the insects. And a beaver is one of the very few animals who create their own environment, where they build their dams. They become so totally self-sufficient. They draw the animals to the beaver dams. The insects come. The fish come. It was a really revered animal. They warned people, don't trap in our country. A lot of the trappers lost their lives because of it.
Somebody once asked me, how come you were so warlike, and why were other tribes afraid of you, and why were the new settlers afraid of you? We did what anybody else would do, and that was to try and protect our land.
So we here so can for me the basic wine system resen ki hagaren banya no sok for manaka so is himba sok nakan tomo hima so we here haka ore bandung haka raka bimbaisen ore banaki Ngosore we semi wanna ke jam hagan shekki himbaki gunakan ngar hagan jam na ha honda mi war oswe sabungia. I understand my mother's feelings and the love she had for this Lemhi area, Salmon area. As we come up this way in this area, she would be so happy that words can't describe her happiness. She says, it's like coming home to my mother and my father. Daughter, you don't understand this feeling. This is like being in peace for myself when I come here. It's like you, she says, when you go home to your father's land, this is how I feel. She says, when I come here, this is my home.
This is such a beautiful area. You have everything. You have the rivers, you have the mountains full of deer. This was like one of the plentiful hunting grounds and salmon grounds. If you look at our whole seasonal trail, salmon was one that we always hit, and it was mostly where we all gathered. A lot of the Shoshone bands would come up to the salmon area, and we would hunt, and it would be a feasting time and a good time.
And they used to fish on the Snake River. There's a place where they fish, and she told me that when they fish for them big sturgeons, they used to use rabbits for snares, and they used, when they hook one, snag one or whatever, and they'll pull them out on horse. That's how big they were. Yeah, I've seen pictures of how big they are. They're like a whale. Yeah.
The spirit is still here, and we always say a prayer because those spirits here are lonely because we're not here no more. And that's why we come back to this area. We visit them and we talk to them.
Tutti shuka ilmihum. Yaman tutui. Khsman tutui qoqsim shiyat khwa. Tamayat chayute. Tasen kon meestlu e hot. Tasen kon meestlu smelt lo hochte. Sunake khalmi. Nem qad sula khlut.
Now, the white man didn't come around from this way first. My great-grandmother used to say it was from Tsartuleo, from the north. She said her folks or her grandparents, somebody before her saw Piqsqeli. This means the white people come from Tsartuleo, from the north. When Lewis and Clark first come around, most of the people, that was the first white man they ever saw.
The way it's told, they find the Salish, and it's not really that way. My ancestors saw them and watched them and allowed them to enter. And they just stopped everything and helped these people that to them were very pitiful. They were poorly equipped for material belongings, and traveling goods. They had bad horses, and they really needed what my ancestors had. It was September when they met, and so September is the month of the choke cherry, so they would have had all their seasonal food from the summer. They'd have bitterroot, and they'd have camas, and they'd have all of their berries harvested by that time. And so here you have a pretty abundant diet.
I had a relative used to talk about it. She died in 1960. When she was close to 100 years old, Sophie Muiz. And she would say that when Lewis and Clark first got here, our people wondered why they had a Quasque with them. The black man was a blue jay, that's what they thought. Because our people, they have a ceremony in the middle of winter time that has a blue jay or several blue jays. What kind of a ceremony were they going to perform? What were they up to? That was their main concern, was this one black man. They finally communicated with each other, and they got to go up and rub their finger on his face and find out that wasn't paint or ashes.
Kia tau wata siwas kakona nunim tau te toka ni kia kana ka kakine klenaha me pa spike kakine pe aisna pe saula ka piulal wichna sikam ke kina kakine lakhle hiwas pa tu hipt ku steeds saikiptatas kaus ka kamas ka pa tu kina hipimtatu Kuswasan kina he was a tao kakona he yapa ina nakakiha tao nunim titoka nimipu. Nimipu means that's what we call ourselves in this verse. It means we the people. We call it precious land here as a gathering place of our old people who come here to camp and rest and have a meeting with other tribes. Also, they had horse races here, and just a good gathering with the Salish people.
There is a lot of interaction between the tribes. There's a lot of intermarriage between tribes, but historically, even though there's some big mountains between us and the Salish, our people traveled over those mountains, and there's that's where the Nez Perce Trail is.
There's the old trail that goes through here, as was the people that went to or the plains area to trade our kind of food with their kind of food. There were all kinds of sacred food that our people lived on for years and years back before any other kind of food came to our land. And they used this special trail, what they called Kasai Nayak, going to gather food.
And we call it Naptinishak's trail to the Nez Perce and further. It goes clear to Chilpetmet, which is the ocean.
And on the way, what the food they gathered, they'd stop and dry it and bury it. And on their way back, they'd pick it all up and go back and spend the winter.
Our new year is December 20th. That's when we recognize that a new year is beginning. And for us, that's the time that the world turns itself around and everything begins to come to life again. That's when the roots start readying themselves to come out, and the berries start readying themselves to come out, and we know that the fish are coming back. It's the time that we celebrate as the new year. The elders teach us that we become sacred because we're out gathering the first foods for the first foods feast. And they teach us as we're handling that food to keep ourselves clean, spiritually, mentally, in every way, because as we're preparing that food, what they tell us is that whatever we're feeling, that's what we're giving to the people.
The beaver, we call him Wush Wush, is a great monster. And when we say monster, we say it respectfully, because beaver has the ability to change his own world. And we as man, we cannot allow ourselves to change our world. We have to live with the world. But beaver, or Wush, is monster because he has the ability to change the environment. And the story goes is that Coyote, Spittleye, and Monster were fighting over who's going to be in charge of the fish, who's going to be in charge of the water, who's going to be in charge of the country. And Spittleye, being our hero, because he's so conniving and he's mysterious and he's mischief. And that's the way we try to look at ourselves on one side. Spiliai and Waspush attack each other to fight over the land and the water and the streams and the fish and all things. And they battle from the top of the Cascade Ranges, and they come tumbling down, and they create the gaps and the valleys that flow from Snoqualmie and all the way down to Wallulaton. The story behind that is that Waspush was finally beaten by Spiliai, but only because of the sisters that resided within him. The sisters that resided within Spiliai were three, and they're the ones that had the heart and the mind to be able to accomplish things that Spiliai could never do on his own. So in a sense, when we speak from the heart. We pray from our heart, we pray for our body, and then we pray for our spirit. So these are our lessons that we learn through our legends. And so we share them with our children so that they may be able to share it with their children. We have oral histories today that go back 10,000 years. There is no migration story. We were created here. We did not cross any land bridge. We have our creation story here. It would take me 3 days to tell you that story. But we were created here. We've always been here. When we can go back and say this spot and this area was used at this time by these people, that's what continues for us a way to keep our past a part of our everyday life. And all of that history is carried through our traditions and customs and language and religion and our foods. So we're reminded every day because of that past, because we live it every day.
They were not nomads. They had a purpose in why they moved, and there was no calendar to tell you this is when you're supposed to do that. And they did things according to the season. And there was a spring run, but there was fish going up the river all the time. You always hear about pemmican. Well, they had the same thing with salmon. They took all the moisture out of it, and they stored it. And that's what they used for the winter. They moved towards the mountains when it was time for either digging or for hunting. And when they moved, they always dug into the ground and lined it with tree mats and put all their belongings into those storage areas. And then they covered them up and marked them so they knew where they were. Because they couldn't leave it in storage someplace in town or anything like that. There was no such place. And then that's where they would winter.
People have chosen to prepare for the winters. They stay in the valleys and the mountains where it is beautiful, and they have the protection of the valleys and the streams.
Galganikit Zykabanis Karotex is Kak Skalsukta Wataxiam Koba et Asgoka Shaweda in Salmon Kodawa Kalawidan Galganas Gigagaya Ilisas Shaweda Koba at Skoskwa in Kalamat Baewe Masma. I said when we were young, our parents took us down to the river, and that's when they were drying salmon and drying all that, then gathering fruit.
Salmon were very important, not only as a food crop, but we traded salmon, and unlike a lot of tribes, our food came to us. We didn't have to go out and hunt for our food. And in this climate with the strong east winds, we could preserve our food. So we caught more salmon than we could consume, and we would preserve it, and this is what we would trade.
I could tell you a story that that my grandmother told, and this is a story that's a lesson. She said that there was a group of people, and they were cutting salmon, and they were drying salmon. A salmon was never wasted. They used a whole salmon. They filleted the thing, the side, they put it apart. They used a backbone, dried that, hung that up, cut up the salmon head, spread the salmon head. They still do that. And the insides, they used to take out, and they'd string it on a string and dry it. It came winter, then they were eating, then their food was depleted, they're getting less. Then they got down to, they start cooking some of those little deals. And that lady came, the one that she threw all hers away, when she was cutting, and they were picking them up, well, they said, don't give her any. She doesn't like them. So that was a lesson to learn. Don't be particular. That was the thing.
In April, everything was being ready to be harvested up on the hills, just a few miles above the Columbia River. The first plant to be harvested that we harvest is the balsam plant, and we pick it and eat the stem, and we eat it just like celery, and it is just like celery. It's got the stringy fiber, so we peel that off and then we eat it. And that's a very important fiber in the early spring, because you've gone all winter eating dried food, so you really need fresh vegetables, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, and that's the perfect way to get it.
Kabit ich siach was kamuk. Ugu kan saike kamuk shalden saike munki aganim ich siach was kamuk. Piwa lunas slaks de munk uyagu siach was bialda kabit ich slush. Regarding the name Chinook, that's specific to that north shore of the mouth of the Columbia River. Probably the most significant thing you'd see if you come here is Saddle Mountain. So it's a very strong place for Iskum Tomanowis. That's a place where you could find power, but also it's a place, it's Thunderbird's home and a place of origin for part of our Chinook people. And very strong place. And its name is not in Chinook Wawa that I speak, but it's in Old Chinook, and it's Walala Hos.
So when Lewis and Clark were coming down the Columbia River and they wanted to trade, or they wanted to approach a village in a friendly way, they were always approaching the wrong people. They'd pick out someone they thought was the chief. But we didn't really have chiefs here. We had councils in which the women sat and also made decisions. It was really the women that Lewis and Clark should have been contacting to trade, and they didn't.
Chinook women really had a very important role in our society, and while most of the time men were headmen, that's actually not entirely true. One of our main villages here, in fact, Kumkumli, the head person that, of course, very famous, Lewis and Clark's time, his mother was the head person there, and that's who he inherited that right from.
The Chinook people were canoe people. When that tide was getting right, they'd go and get in their canoes and go down and go out and get their clams or catch a fish or whatever they wanted to do.
Lewis and Clark had moccasins. They were wearing moccasins. They were wearing leather pants and leather shirts, leather tunics, and they were wet all the time. Contrast this with the Chinook people who were in and out of canoes, and they didn't wear moccasins. They went barefoot. They wore cedar because cedar, when you pound red cedar bark, it becomes very soft. And they would weave that into a cape and a skirt for the women. When you pound the cedar bark, you're actually putting air pockets into the cedar so that not only is it waterproof, but the air pockets insulate, so it's also warm. And that was a perfect outfit to wear in a wet climate.
They knew when the fish runs were coming, and they knew when they should be here and where they should be there, you know. But all year around there was oysters and clams, and they'd camp and prepare their fish and their food, and pick the berries and prepare for their winter food. They caught those fresh fish right out of the ocean and up the bay and right up into those rivers to spawn. And they knew where the berries grew, and they picked the salmon berries, you know, and the huckleberries and those different berries that they would get.
When I was just a young girl, my grandmother told me that when they'd go up the rivers looking for the little wild blackberries, that they'd look up on the hillsides, and if the fireweed was in bloom, the blackberries were ripe. And that way they could just send a scout ahead to see if the berries were ready. When the blooms came out, they knew it was time to go gather their wild blackberries.
We respect this land that we live in. If I take something off from the land, then I want to put something back. So the next person that comes along and lives where I live, he can have some of the good things that I had.
Without Indian people, they wouldn't have succeeded. But there's no lauding of the humanity of Indian people. It's all the heroic, you know, and endurance and strength and courage and bravery of these other people. And the humanity of Indian people is ignored or dismissed or excluded from the story altogether. When that's the point. That's the point.